Good evening and welcome to episode 29 of Let's Talk Possibility. In studio tonight, we have newly returned South African James Lea-Cox, who after a couple of years living in London, decided to come home the more challenging way. Rather than get on a plane, he got on a mountain bike and along with his friend cycled 15,500 kilometers from London to Cape Town. And we're going to chat to him tonight about what is possible when you view life as an adventure and don't get too bogged down with the material stuff that most of us tend to invest a lot of time and money on. James, welcome to Let's Talk Possibility.
Thank you very much, Eric. Good to be here.
Good evening, folks. This is Eric Vermeulen hosting tonight's Let's Talk Possibility show, and hosting with me tonight, Jonathan Dix. Jonathan, how are you doing?
Hey, very well yourself, Eric. Thanks for, this is looking forward to tonight.
Fantastic. We have an amazing guest tonight. James Lea-Cox has just returned from a 6-month mountain bike trip, starting in Trafalgar Square in London and finishing just a couple of weeks ago in Cape Town, 15,500 kilometers. James, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much. Good to be here and good to be back in SA for a change.
How are the legs feeling?
They're starting to recover. They haven't been on a bike in about 2-3 weeks.
Oh, you've come back to your senses.
Well, you're probably itching to get back on the bike again now.
A lighter bike, and that'll be happening tomorrow, so don't worry.
So, folks, tonight we're going to be discussing the possibilities that open up when you view life as an adventure. I think so many people get caught up in the day-to-day stuff. We surround ourselves with so many commitments that it's difficult to take time off to do what we want to do what we love to do things that challenge us. And James, I think what makes your trip absolutely unique is not just the fact that you've cycled 15,000 Ks from London to Cape Town, but the fact that you funded it yourself.
Well, we didn't want to have sponsors. We didn't really have the time to approach any. And the trip was for ourselves, not for anybody else. We wanted to experience the trip. We wanted to see these countries. So we needed to save. We worked hard. We didn't drink too many beers in the London pubs. So we stockpiled some money and we made it last. We lived on quite a small amount every day, which is possible.
But with a 15,500 kilometer trip, surely the beer would have been sufficient for carbo loading.
It's not like we didn't drink beer. We just reduced our intake, that's all.
So, I mean, James, there you are working in London and you figured time to come back to South Africa, but you weren't going to fly.
Yeah, something like that. Well,
How did this come about?
the mission to cycle home sort of went back to when I read Rian Mans's book around Africa on a bicycle. And I thought, well, if I'm going to go to London, I'll stay there for a few years and I'll come back, but not the easy way. I won't fly back. I won't take an overland tour. But cycling, being a cyclist, was obviously the option that we selected and aimed for.
Mm. So really, this was an expedition sort of in your mind for about 4 or 5 years.
The idea was in our mind, and it only really kicked off as something that's going to happen sort of a year before the trip.
And what was sort of the catalyst for that? I mean, a lot of people think of going overseas and traveling or doing an adventure within their own country, and it never materializes. It stays a pipe dream.
Well, my biggest worry is that I'd get too old, get married, have kids, and then when that happens, I can't go cycling around the world. I can't do that. So if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. And something like that is a catalyst to make that decision, quit your job and just sort of go for it. And it was quite interesting. I went to one of Rian Mans's presentations in London, and he did a presentation on his trip and things like that. And I asked him for some tips afterwards, expecting, don't go to this country, don't go to that country.
Yeah.
And so he said, just quit and do it.
Just quit and do it.
Just do it.
Like,
And I thought, I came here asking for more advice than that, but that was probably the best advice he ever gave me. The issue was trying to convince my friend to do it as well, which took a bit of time, but he did, and that's how it happened.
So you quit your job, you sold up your life in London.
Yes, indeed.
And got on a bike and...
Simply put, yes.
Yeah. How do you make that jump beyond looking for, I think, what most people look for in life, and that is stability and permanence, to then say, I'm going to put that on hold. I'm going to take a huge risk here to do the adventure that I want.
But the thing is, when I first mentioned it to one of my bosses that I want to cycle home and it'll involve quitting my job, the response was, what about your career? What about things like that? And I said, well, I'm pretty sure I'm going to learn a lot more in that 6 months than I would 6 months at a desk job in London. And they looked at me quite weirdly, but only a few weeks later did they actually realize that this is an amazing trip. And then they actually got quite jealous themselves. And every work colleague I spoke to said, I'd love to do something like that. I'd love to just get on my bike and go. But they don't do it. You just have to sort of take life and just go for it.
So what do you think holds back all those colleagues or the average person?
I think most people get stuck in this sort of cycle of going to work every morning 9 till 5, or in London 9 till 8 at night, as it tends to be. And they buy cars, house mortgages, things like that, and it's very hard to step away from that. I didn't have any of that, which was sort of an idea in the back of my mind a few years ago, not to sort of lock myself down with debt and things like that.
A lot of people do that. I was, sorry, finishing the
no
novel.
problem.
No, I read the other day that South Africans in debt, you're looking at around about 75 to 80% of South Africans who are battling debt, not even making ends meet, and that I think really hampers your possibilities in many ways.
Yeah, for sure, because you become a slave of your own environment.
You become a slave to the system, really.
Yeah.
You can't leave it. Although we have met some people on our trip who do have mortgages and things like that back home, and they've put plans in place to keep those going while they're traveling. So they realized that they wanted to do this trip, and they had things to hold them back, but they made a plan. And I suppose it boils down to, if you really want to do it, and it's not just saying, I would like to do something like that. It's I will do something like that.
Or talking about the fact that I've just done it.
Yeah,
Something like that.
Yeah.
Plan the next trip.
Yeah.
Although don't tell my girlfriend that.
How did you convince her to kind of just let you go for 6 months?
She knows that I like a bit of adventure. I've done quite a few in my life, and most of them have been relatively short, probably 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. So when I suggested it, that I wanted to cycle home to Cape Town, she thought, well, okay, that's nice. So I wasn't that serious. But then it started to get serious, and she just accepted that I wanted to do this. And she waited for 6 months and got to Cape Town. It's still fantastic.
And she was there to greet you at the end.
Well, she got on a bike and met me at the end. And she doesn't
brilliant.
like cycling.
And she didn't cycle from London. She
No,
just cycled.
She met us close to Cape Point with a bunch of cyclists, and I was quite surprised and loved it. So,
How much planning went into that? You said it took about a year, but how specific
I say a
was
year. It wasn't a year of continuous planning. It was a year of, this is the idea. We'll slowly do things. We'll decide what bike we need, what gear we need, how much money we would need, and where to go. And in the last, say, 3 or 4 months, planning really started. And at first it was a cycle across Europe as a test run. And then sometime later on, we'd do the whole trip. But then we thought, why do a test run? What is the point of doing a test run when you can just start in London and keep on going? And that was our plan.
Brilliant.
And the planning really got to us. Sometimes you'd get home from work late at night. You'd be on the internet for a couple of hours every evening, thinking, I've got to make supper, I've got to do this, see friends. Just spending a lot of time on things like Google Earth and other blogs around there, just trying to get as much information as you can. And it paid off, because we actually look back at now and say, thank goodness we did some planning.
Right.
Because some people don't plan and they come really short. I'm not saying you have to over-plan things, but at least have an idea of where you're going, what you can expect, things like visas.
Well, if you looked at some of the sort of political turbulence in the Middle East and sort of North Africa, and just going onto your website, that was, North Africa featured heavily. There's some countries that you would have to have tiptoed through, perhaps, or even avoided altogether.
Well, the plan was always to cycle to the end of Italy and then catch a ferry to Algeria and then cycle through Libya. But Gaddafi
He had other plans
got in the way, so that sort of had to be pushed aside. And then we thought about going through Syria, going around the Baltics, not the Baltic States, but around the Balkans, which would have taken a bit long. It would have taken at least a year, we think. And Syria is not a happy place at the moment.
Yeah.
So we decided to cycle to Rome and then fly from there to Cairo. And even Cairo itself wasn't exactly stable at the time.
Yeah.
We saw a few protests, and it wasn't the best country to cycle through, but it was still very interesting. I won't say I'll go back to Egypt, but it was still quite interesting.
Yeah, there's sure.
Egypt is famous for its bureaucracy and visa issues, transport, getting vehicles and things into and out of Egypt. How did you guys get around a lot of the red tape?
Well, getting visas was easy. We traveled through Europe on European passports, but as soon as we hit Cairo, we flipped to the green mamba, which is king in Africa, and a lot cheaper visa-wise. The red tape is that people there have no respect for the law anymore, following the Arab Spring. So people weren't scared to antagonize us, try and swerve us off the road. But then when we did stop, we met a lot of friendly people as well. The biggest challenge was also dealing with the police. The police, they are there to protect tourists, in their words, because the GDP of Egypt's based on tourism largely.
Yeah, but
And with the whole uprising, it crashed. So when they see a tourist on a bike, they think they should protect them, which means telling you to get into a police van so they can drive you to the next town, which we refused to do. So we were escorted for a couple of 100 Ks by a police car in front of us and a police car behind us. But they don't understand how fast a bike can go.
Yeah.
So they are pushing you and they don't want you to stop,
And you
even
felt
when
a
you're
little bit
hungry.
pressured, yeah.
So on the day that we had a police escort was our biggest day in terms of kilometers, and the day that we felt most stuffed afterwards, pretty much.
Because I remember reading on your blog somewhere that I think in Egypt as well, the police forced you to take a different route.
They did. We decided to stick to one side of the Nile, which is the less popular route, so we thought we wouldn't have any trouble. And we went through police posts. We'd sort of accelerate when we saw them and cycle through as quickly as possible, waving and smiling. They would be shouting after us, and eventually they gave up. But we got to one, and out came the nails and the spikes and the police car, and we were told to cross the Nile again and have a police escort, which we couldn't avoid, so we just gave in. But otherwise, pretty hectic country. Places like Luxor and Aswan, tourist hotspots, it's fine.
that sounds
Every
exotic.
other town is not really a tourist hotspot, so you're the only tourist there, and it's quite a challenge.
The one part that you were telling me about earlier, which I had a good laugh at, I must be honest, is the kids in Ethiopia. They took pot shots at you with the local firing squad of stones.
The kids in Ethiopia have a reputation amongst both cycle tourists and the overlanding crew for enjoying throwing stones at people. And pretty much the country is so overpopulated, so there's lots of people on the road.
Yeah.
And whenever they see you, they run out towards you, screaming, shouting, asking for money. And as much as you wave and smile, as soon as your back is turned, the stones come flying. And luckily, most of them are small, so they can't throw that well. Some of them do hit you, though. Not too badly, but once or twice is not bad, but when it happens every day for 8 hours a day, it gets to you. And although Ethiopia is a really beautiful country, we felt that the people let it down, especially for us.
Biggest highlight of the trip?
I think there's too many highlights. I've been asked the question, what is your favorite country? And I can't even answer that because each country had really exquisite parts and also really hard parts. But we felt that Sudan was the biggest shock to the system. We were expecting a really complicated country, and it was from a bureaucratic point of view, but the people there are so friendly. There are not many people around. We were just cruising off the road, camping in the desert, no problem. Fantastic scenery, fantastic sunsets. We never had an issue with water, and it was quite different to what we actually expected. So that part of Sudan, the northern part, was the one we enjoyed most.
There are quite a few people on chat here, so if you've got any questions, you're more than welcome to type them out. And James will I think, answer as best as he can, give us his opinion on what have you.
At least.
James, I think one of the other concepts, I mean, I've known you for a good couple of years, but you seem to embrace life as an adventure. And if one looks at the construct of adventure, it's kind of any endeavor of which the outcome is uncertain.
Yeah.
And fair enough, you did some planning, but ultimately I think what drives you is just the uncertainty of planning something.
Well, that's what I enjoy. That's the point of adventure. Things are too planned. It's not an adventure. You could go on a package tour and do the same thing. Doing it yourself, not hiring guides, not hiring guiding companies, it makes things uncertain. We knew we'd get to Cape Town some way or another.
Yeah.
We just didn't know what it would be like getting there. And that was an adventure in its own. It was sort of, to me, the unexplored. People have been there, but to us, we'd never been there. We hadn't really seen those places or seen those people. And that was quite exciting. Actually leaving London on a bicycle, even though I'd cycled that route out of the city probably 500 times, it felt so different. This is an adventure we're going on. We don't know how it's going to end, which way we would take, what would happen. And that just made it really, really exciting. It got the adrenaline going.
So even though you did some level of planning, you just thought, well, we're just going to go. I mean, you had an idea of getting to Rome and then flying across and then just take it as it comes. I mean, were you working on how many kilometers you'd ride per day?
Well, look, I'm a bit of a planner, so I like to plan
All right.
some things. So I knew how long it would take us, based on a sort of a route that we'd put together, but we didn't follow the route completely.
Yeah.
We knew we could do a certain amount of kilometers per day. Well, we thought we knew. We'd never been cycle tourists before.
Right.
We'd always been mountain bikers and road cyclists, so that's without panniers, without luggage. So we knew we could do big Ks on a bike like that, but as soon as you put 20, 30 kilograms on the bike, it changes. But your body adapts to that, and you just keep on going. And we were actually quite surprised that we could continue every day. And we learned to appreciate what the human body could do and what we'd see out there.
I mean, and that in itself is quite interesting, because I think a lot of people limit themselves by the experiences that they have. So
Not even. Some people limit themselves based on experiences of others, which I think is even more sad.
Yeah.
So, if I've been chatting to a few friends and they've had a negative experience, I have not experienced it, but I will take their word as gospel almost, and not allow myself to explore that, which is very sad.
Yeah. And that's, James, I mean, I think it's so exciting that you say you, as someone who's done a lot of adventuring, still managed to find parts of yourself that you didn't know.
Exactly. We had never undertaken a trip. Neither my friend or I had undertaken a trip of this scale. We had no idea how we would survive every day. We had no idea where we would get water, food, what sort of food, the issues we would have with government, police. And we're used to South Africa, we're used to the UK. It's simple there, relatively.
Yeah.
This was the great unknown. People don't go to some of the places we went to.
Yeah.
And in some places we got there, and some of the kids looked at us as if we were a ghost. And we asked one of the village elders, what's the problem? He says, well, they've never seen someone like you before. And there aren't many places in the world they can go and do that.
True.
So something like that was really, it was inspirational in one sense, but also you just felt, I'm here. Not many people come here. If I didn't undertake this journey, I'd never see this.
Were there ever places where you felt unwelcome?
I think when kids throw stones at you, you feel unwelcome. But even in those cases, when you stop, get off your bike, as soon as you aren't a moving target, suddenly people are relatively friendly to you. You can pop into a roadside shack and buy some food. It's not like they won't serve you or help you. And we found African people, and there's obviously so many different types and tribes and races, we found them incredibly friendly and welcoming to us.
Great.
Which was
That's
quite a nice feeling, especially when you arrive in a village and people come up to you and ask you questions about your trip, where you're going, would you like to come and stay at my house, sort of thing. Put yourself in their shoes. I don't know if you'll be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But I think in, let's call it Western culture, we're a lot less open to that. Particularly South Africa, we surround ourselves with 6-foot-high walls, electric fences. You don't talk to your neighbour, never mind speak to strangers who are passing through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we found on our European section, which was France, Switzerland, and Italy, we didn't really talk to many people. We talked to people in shops when we learned the language to buy something, like buying a baguette or something like that. But people never stopped us on the road to chat to us, or they saw us in a supermarket, like two really dirty cyclists, thinking, what are they doing? Let me ask them. We never ever had that. As soon as we landed in Cairo,
different story.
Everybody wanted to know what we're doing. They were so interested. We got tired of answering the same questions, but people were really, really interested.
Africa is just a warm continent in
I
general.
think so.
People are infectious.
And I
There's a
think
pulse.
that attitude that we have in Africa, and I mean I've travelled extensively on the continent as well. I think that is what probably sets us up for a very positive future. The fact that we are willing to embrace strangers, that we are willing to take people in and to help.
I want to ask, not everyone shares your sense of adventure, and almost, I call it Uber adventure, and that's hardcore. I mean, to get on a bike with an extra 30 kilos and go through some countries which most people would be scared on. What would be some advice that you have to say someone who wants to take an adventure in a more perhaps stylish kind of mode of transport, but maybe not in sort of developing countries? People want to plan, they want to travel. Where would be a good place for them to start if they're not going to go like the hectic cross-country adventures?
Look, I think the level of adventure depends on the person. You can have an adventure in Joburg in the hills if you really want to, going for a trail run or something like that. So it depends on the person and what they're willing to do. But what I say to people always think that they have to hire a guide, have to hire a company. We're all capable. We can all do this. You're not going to die out there, or hopefully not. Just be inspired. Go out and do some research. If you want to walk to Everest Base Camp, do it. You can go there. You can fly to Nepal. Just go and walk it. That could be your biggest adventure if you've never done anything like that before. And people seem to think that it's scary. Everything could go wrong. I could lose my wallet. I could get robbed, lose my passport.
That could happen around the corner.
That could happen. You could be hit by a car crossing the N1 highway.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be crossing the N1 highway, but another road. That's all part of the adventure. Lose your passport, get another one.
No, for sure.
We didn't lose our passports, thank goodness.
Yeah, I mean, William Shakespeare wrote that misery acquaints one with strange bedfellows. And, the idea behind that is when you suffer with someone, you get to know them really well. Yeah. Now, you undertook this trip with your mate, Mark.
Yeah.
What was it like living in close quarters with someone else?
Like I know Mark quite well, and we've done a few trips before to quite hairy places. So we are used to each other's company in sort of difficult situations. So he was the ideal partner for a trip like this. And he's very laid back. He's quite chilled. He's very fit, and he's really keen for adventure. So ideal partner, as it were. Look, I think when we were cycling together, there were times when we got on each other's nerves. There must have been.
Yeah.
But we didn't have any outbursts. I think it was more of like a silent tension, and it disappeared pretty quickly. And sometimes it was, I'm putting my iPod in now, and then you knew.
That sort of almost became an unspoken language.
And then you'd cycle for a couple of hours listening to your music, and then suddenly you'd pop out your earphones and say, let's have a chat about something random. And we had so many random discussions about what needs to change in the world, what we want to do next. And I don't know, there was so much banter that I don't think we ever really got on each other's nerves, although our biggest regret was probably that our tent was a bit too small.
You mentioned that a little earlier, rubbing shoulder to shoulder there.
Yeah, rubbing shoulder to shoulder. It gets really hot in those tents, especially in parts of the world where it's in the high 40s, still
near the equator.
Into the evening. Yeah. So I think if we had taken 2 tents, it would have been a lot more comfortable. But taking 2 tents, extra weight, still have to carry it.
Yeah.
So
you said you came across some other folks on similar trips and similar expeditions. Any ladies, any women?
We saw 2 ladies by themselves. One was a Canadian, and one was a Japanese lady. The Japanese love cycle touring.
Okay.
And we saw 2 Japanese. We saw a guy and a girl. We were quite worried about the Canadian girl. She was very small and blonde hair, and we thought, something's going to happen. But I checked her blog the other day, and she's still going. And people are looking after her. They see that she's very small, petite. People are willing to help her and sort of not let anything bad happen to her.
Yeah.
So she's still succeeding. She's doing it a bit slower than we are, but I think she's having a great time.
So, and safety tips from a lady's perspective. Maybe go with more than just one person on your own.
I think going as a pair, 2 people, it allows you to talk to each other. I think that's the biggest issue. It's also a bit safer, I think. But if you're one person and you're a lady doing a trip like this, try and stay in churches, schools at night. That's the biggest tip. Look, we did that. We stayed in churches, we stayed in schools, we camped wild a lot. And in some countries, rest houses, or rather rest houses by the hour, are quite cheap. So we stayed in those places. People seem to think that Africa is a dangerous place, but it's not that dangerous.
I think it's probably more a South African perception.
Mostly the unknown as well.
But it's like I found the same when I was in London for a while, and when I said I was going to cycle through Africa, I had a few colleagues saying, what about the lions and tigers? And I said, you don't get tigers in Africa.
You do in zoos. They're safe there.
And things like, what do you eat? I said, well, we eat what the locals eat. I said, what, do you have to shoot animals? No.
No.
So people don't really understand the continent, and we felt that I knew a lot about Africa. I traveled there a lot, worked there a lot. And after this trip, my entire perspective of the continent has changed completely.
Yeah, you mentioned you keep weight down. If we can get a little bit philosophical, I think, for a moment. In life, we tend to surround ourselves with stuff, material stuff, emotional stuff. And you've just spent 6 months with the bare minimum of stuff. How light do you think one can travel through life?
On this trip, our priorities were water, food, and a place to sleep. Now being back in sort of the civilized world, I've realized how stressful it is to think about things like work, jobs, cell phone contracts, things like that. On that trip, we didn't have any of that. And it was sort of going back to basics. We had everything we needed, not much, I might add. We had maybe 2 or 3 T-shirts, a tent, but we were able to survive on that.
I mean, you're not wasting away. You're a healthy-looking guy here. So.
Oh, at times I was a bit skinny. The food gets better as you head further south.
And I remember when I was up in Kenya, you get to like goat meat quite a lot.
We ate a lot of goat.
You eat what the locals eat, I think, yeah. I've got a question here from Talana. She's saying, what would your biggest learning be that you will remember and tell your grandkids when you do get married and have kids and then they have kids?
I think the biggest thing I learned was there's nothing wrong with taking a break from the rat race. You can step out for a bit, do something really exciting, something that you'll sort of remember and you can tell people about and sort of tell your family about. And we had so many people that sort of were living their adventure through us. They were following us on the internet. We didn't even realize how many people were following us. We thought, oh, we're just typing a blog. And then suddenly you get all these messages when you get back. And you just start to realize that you don't have to just stay in the rat race the whole time. You can step out, do something amazing. And that's the biggest lesson I've learned. I never took a gap year when I left school or when I left university, probably one of my biggest regrets. And this was sort of that experience. Right. And I think you need a lot of them. I think people who take a year off after school, it's a great idea, but why should it stop there? Every 10 years, take a big trip. You won't forget it, ever. Yeah. You would struggle to get back to sit at a desk, I can tell you that much.
Yeah, for sure. I often think that those gap years are sort of wasted on the youth.
Well, I had a gap year. Yeah, look, I enjoyed it. I mean, I disagree. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I bet
great experience.
But I think, as James has done, you wait till you're, late 20s, early 30s, when you've got a clearer idea of what you can do with that gap year. And just go and do something that's sort of way out there.
We saw a few guys who are on their own mission, not on bicycles, guys taking public transport, just going to random places. And they were traveling with next to nothing. They had a small, not even a backpack, but a day pack with just a few changes of clothes. And they just wanted to see as much as they could, living as cheaply as possible, knowing that they can go back and sort of get a job again and sort of save for the next trip.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time.
I think we are, but quickly, I mean, James, you mentioned your blog and people started following you. Have you got, how many people started following that?
And how can they get in touch with you?
Well, I haven't actually checked the data for the blog, but we had a lot of comments. Lots of family members put some embarrassing comments on the website, which we tried to remove, but the technology in Africa doesn't even allow you to do that. We had quite a few followers on Facebook, lots of our friends and lots of people I've never even heard of before who some have came across the site. And we didn't really publicize the trip. We did some raising of money for charity. It wasn't really our sole purpose. We thought this would be a good idea to support a charity. But we never publicized it, and people just found out about it. And I think there's about 200-300 likes on Facebook, which I'd say half are friends and half are people I don't know, which is fantastic.
Absolutely. Where can people get in touch with you?
I think the best thing is on Facebook, if you just search Big Ride Africa. I know there's one called The Big Ride. That's not ours. They haven't even started yet. But The Big Ride Africa. And if it's the right page, it has a sort of an orange picture with the London Eye. And there was Table Mountain on it, but it's fallen off. And if you aren't on Facebook, there's bigride-africa.com. and there's a sort of contact us or comment sheet on there.
Okay. What's next?
Yeah.
Probably a change in career, I'm not sure. But there will always be adventure, I think. I've decided to stay in South Africa. I've sort of emigrated back to my country of birth, which is great.
Ah, it's good to have you back.
Yeah. Couldn't face it. Couldn't face that London weather. So it's good to be back. So there will be a trip. I'm just not sure what or how long or where.
Fantastic. Folks, it's 8 o'clock. I can't believe half an hour is gone. And
Time flies when you're in the seat of a saddle. Boom.
well, fortunately, we're sitting on more comfortable chairs
comfy
tonight.
chairs.
I can give you my saddle if you want.
But folks, thank you very much for tuning in. As James said, if you'd like to get in touch with him, ask some more questions, or maybe even see how he can help you with your next adventure, or whatever else comes from it, look him up on Facebook, The Big Ride Africa. And I think, Jono, that's about it.
Yeah, I think just from this particular show, what we've looked to achieve is to explore something really unique, something that is a big challenge and something that's just out of the ordinary. Not many people give up the rat race to take a 6-month sabbatical, and it's certainly the idea is also to challenge that perspective. It's possible. It's very possible. People are doing it with next to nothing. They're able to go through seemingly scary countries, and they're not scary at all. People are welcoming, and to have a really worthwhile and worldly experience. Hopefully your words tonight, James, have inspired some form of even just changing the thinking, so that you can go out there and do something that is, hey, you have a great time, reward yourself with a memory.
Fantastic. Folks, you have been listening to Let's Talk Possibility. And tonight we had a chat about what is possible when you are willing to let go a little bit and experience the adventure of life. Let's keep the conversation going. You can follow us on Twitter at Let's LT Possibility, or our Facebook page, Let's Talk Possibility. And we'll see you again next week, same time, same place.
Great. Thanks very much for coming through, James, and
Thank
happy
you very much
birthday
for
as
having
well.